Alaska, a land of endless night, frozen silence, and secrets buried beneath the ice. But what if I told you that in the shadows of its mountains and the depths of its forests, something else is waiting? Tonight, I'll take you deep into the heart of Alaska, where the cold isn't the only thing that chills you to the bone. These aren't just stories, they're true encounters, whispered by those who barely escaped with their sanity. From haunted towers to icy lakes and the blackest winter nights, each tale will pull you further from the safety of the firelight. Are you ready to hear what really lurks in Alaska's darkness? Listen closely, because once you start, you may never sleep the same way again. If you've ever heard of Whittier, Alaska, you probably know it as that strange little town where almost everyone lives in the same building. But what most people don't know is that Whittier has secrets, dark, chilling secrets that most residents refuse to talk about. I learned this the hard way during the winter of 2018 when I took a job as a night security guard at the Begich Towers. I was 24, broke and desperate for work. The ad said, "Quiet nights, good pay, free room." I thought it sounded perfect. I had no idea what I was walking into. The first thing you notice about Whittier in winter is the silence. The snow muffles everything, and the wind howls through the empty streets. The only way in or out is through a long, narrow tunnel that closes at night. Once you're in, you're stuck until morning. That first night, as I dragged my suitcase through the icy parking lot, I felt like I was entering another world. The Begich Towers is a massive concrete block of a building, gray, looming, and ugly. It used to be an army barracks, and it still feels like one. The hallways are long and echoing, the lights flicker, and the walls are thick enough to muffle even the loudest screams. I met my boss, a gruff old guy named Stan, in the lobby. He handed me a ring of keys and a walkie-talkie and told me my job was simple. Walk the halls every hour, check the doors, and make sure nobody was causing trouble. "Don't go poking around the old laundry room on the basement level," he said, his eyes narrowing. "It's off limits. Got it?" I nodded, not thinking much of it. Every building has its weird rules. My first few nights were uneventful. I'd walk the halls, listen to the wind rattling the windows, and try not to think about how alone I was. Sometimes I'd pass a resident in the hallway, but most people kept to themselves. It was on my fourth night that things started to get strange. I was doing my rounds on the 10th floor when I heard it, a faint whisper just at the edge of hearing. I stopped, heart pounding, and listened. The whispering continued, soft and urgent, like someone was having a conversation just around the corner. I crept forward, shining my flashlight down the empty hallway. The voices stopped. I told myself it was just the wind or maybe the pipes, but as I turned to head back, I caught a glimpse of something in the reflection of a window, a shadow, darker than the rest, moving just behind me. When I spun around, there was nothing there. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shadow flickering at the edge of my vision. The next night, the whispers came again. This time they were louder, more insistent. I could almost make out words, my name maybe, or something that sounded like it. I tried to follow the sound, but it always seemed to slip away, leading me deeper into the building. I started to notice other things too. Doors that I knew I'd locked would be standing open. Lights would flicker and die as I walked past. Once, I found a trail of wet footprints leading from the stairwell to the old laundry room, the one Stan had told me to avoid. I asked Stan about it the next morning, but he just grunted and told me to mind my own business. "This building's got history," he said. "Best not to dig too deep." But I couldn't let it go. The whispers were getting worse, and I was starting to feel like I was being watched. I'd catch glimpses of movement in the corners of my eyes, shadows that didn't belong, faces in the windows that vanished when I looked straight at them. One night, as I was making my rounds, the power went out. The hallway plunged into darkness and my flashlight flickered and died. I fumbled for my phone, but the screen wouldn't turn on. That's when I heard it, the whispering, louder than ever, coming from the basement. I knew I shouldn't go down there. Every instinct screamed at me to stay away. but something was pulling me, drawing me toward the old laundry room. The air grew colder as I descended the stairs, my breath fogging in front of me. The whispering grew frantic, overlapping voices, pleading and angry. When I reached the basement, I saw that the door to the laundry room was standing open, swinging slowly on its hinges. The darkness inside was absolute, swallowing the weak beam of my backup flashlight. I stepped inside, heart hammering in my chest. The room was freezing, colder than the rest of the building. The walls were lined with old, rusted machines, and the floor was slick with water. In the center of the room, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A circle of footprints leading nowhere, as if someone had been walking in circles for hours. The whispering was deafening now, echoing off the walls. I could feel something moving in the darkness, circling me, getting closer. I tried to back away, but the door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into total darkness. That's when I felt it, a cold hand gripping my shoulder and a voice whispering right in my ear. I froze. The hand on my shoulder was ice cold, the grip impossibly strong. I couldn't move, couldn't even scream. The whispering in my ear was frantic now, a jumble of voices layered over each other, some pleading, some angry, some just empty. I could feel hot breath on my neck, but the room was so cold my teeth were chattering. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed by fear. Seconds, minutes, it felt like hours. Then as suddenly as it had grabbed me, the hand let go. I stumbled forward, gasping, and the whispering stopped. The silence was so complete it rang in my ears. I fumbled for the door, but it wouldn't budge. I pounded on it, shouting for help, but my voice sounded small and swallowed by the thick concrete walls. That's when I heard something new, a low, guttural moan coming from the far corner of the room. I spun around, shining my dying flashlight into the darkness. At first I saw nothing. Then, slowly, a shape began to emerge from the shadows. It was a figure, hunched and shivering, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were wide and black, reflecting the weak light like a cat's. It crawled toward me, dragging itself across the wet floor, leaving a trail of dark, sticky water behind. I backed away, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. The thing stopped a few feet from me and lifted its head. Its mouth opened, impossibly wide, and the whispering started again, this time coming from inside its throat, a chorus of voices all speaking at once. "Help us," it rasped. "Let us out." I pressed myself against the door, desperate to escape. The thing reached out a hand, its fingers long and twisted, and touched my ankle. The cold shot up my leg like electricity, and suddenly I was somewhere else. I was standing in the same room, but it was different, brighter, cleaner. I saw soldiers in old uniforms laughing and talking as they loaded laundry into the machines. Then the scene shifted. The soldiers were gone, replaced by a group of children, their faces pale and frightened. They huddled together as the lights flickered and the shadows crept along the walls. I saw flashes, people screaming, running, doors slamming shut. The shadows swallowed them one by one, dragging them into the darkness. I felt their fear, their desperation, their hopelessness. The voices in my head grew louder, begging for help, for release. Then, just as suddenly, I was back in the freezing, dark laundry room. The thing was gone. The door creaked open behind me and I stumbled out, gasping for air. I ran up the stairs, not stopping until I reached my room. I locked the door and collapsed on the bed, shaking uncontrollably. I didn't sleep at all that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faces, heard those voices. The next morning, I went to Stan and told him everything. He just looked at me, his face pale and drawn. "You saw them, didn't you?" he said quietly. "The shadows, the ones that never left." He told me the truth then, or at least as much as he knew. During World War II, the building had been used as a military barracks. There'd been a fire in the basement. Some said it was an accident. Others whispered it was something darker. A group of soldiers and children had been trapped in the laundry room. They'd pounded on the doors, screamed for help, but no one came. By the time the fire was out, they were gone, but people said their spirits never left. "Sometimes they whisper," Stan said. "Sometimes they show themselves, but they always want the same thing, someone to remember them, someone to let them out." I quit that day, packed my bags and left Whittier as soon as the tunnel opened, but the shadows followed me. Even now, years later, I still hear the whispers sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the darkness presses in. I see faces in the windows, shadows in the corners of my room. I don't know if I brought something back with me or if the shadows just found a new place to hide. All I know is this: if you ever find yourself in Whittier, Alaska, and you hear whispering in the dark, don't follow it. Don't go looking for the shadows, because once they find you, they never let you go. If you've ever driven north out of Anchorage, you've probably seen the sign for Eklutna Lake. It's a beautiful, icy blue stretch of water surrounded by mountains and thick forest. People go there to hike, fish, and camp. But there's a story about that lake, a story the locals whisper about, especially when the fog rolls in and the wind howls through the trees. I never believed it, not until the night I saw her for myself. It was late October, just before the first heavy snow. My friends and I had planned one last camping trip before winter locked everything down. There were 4 of us, me, my girlfriend Jess, and our friends Tyler and Sam. We were all in our 20s, city kids who thought we knew everything. We packed up our gear, loaded the truck, and headed out to Eklutna Lake, laughing and blasting music the whole way. The campground was almost empty when we arrived. The air was cold and sharp, and the lake was covered in a thin layer of mist. We set up our tents near the water's edge, built a fire, and settled in for the night. As the sun set, the temperature dropped fast. The forest around us grew dark and silent, except for the occasional crack of a branch or the distant call of an owl. We sat around the fire, telling stories and roasting marshmallows. Tyler, always the joker, started talking about the frozen bride, a ghost story he'd heard from his uncle, who grew up in the area. According to the legend, a young woman had drowned in the lake on her wedding night decades ago. Some said she'd been murdered by her jealous fiancé. Others claimed she'd slipped and fallen through the ice. Either way, her body was never found. People said her spirit still wandered the shoreline, searching for her lost love. Jess rolled her eyes and called it nonsense, but I noticed she kept glancing over her shoulder at the dark water. I laughed it off too, but deep down, something about the story unsettled me. Maybe it was the way the mist clung to the surface of the lake, or the way the wind seemed to carry faint, mournful cries. We eventually crawled into our tents, the fire burning low. I lay awake, listening to the wind and the soft lapping of the water. At some point, I must have drifted off because I woke with a start to the sound of footsteps crunching on the frosty ground outside. At first, I thought it was one of my friends heading to the bathroom. But then I heard a soft, shivering sob, so quiet I almost thought I was dreaming. I sat up, heart pounding, and unzipped the tent just enough to peek outside. The moon was bright, casting long shadows across the campsite. I saw a figure standing at the edge of the lake, her back to me. She was wearing a long white dress that fluttered in the wind, and her hair was loose and tangled. She looked impossibly pale, almost glowing in the moonlight. I watched, frozen, as she stepped onto the thin ice at the edge of the lake. The ice creaked and groaned under her weight, but she didn't seem to notice. She walked slowly, almost floating, out onto the water. I wanted to call out, to warn her, but my voice caught in my throat. Suddenly, the ice cracked with a sharp, echoing sound. The woman stopped, turned her head, and looked straight at me. Her eyes were dark and hollow, her face twisted in a mask of sorrow and rage. I stumbled back, falling into the tent, my heart racing. I must have made a noise because Jess woke up beside me. "What's wrong?" she whispered, her voice thick with sleep. "There's someone out there," I managed to say, "on the lake." She frowned, but when she looked outside, the woman was gone. The ice was empty, the mist swirling over the water. Jess told me I was just seeing things, that it was probably a trick of the light, but I knew what I'd seen. I lay awake the rest of the night, listening for footsteps, for sobs, for anything. The next morning, I tried to tell Tyler and Sam about the woman on the ice. They laughed it off, teasing me for letting the ghost story get to my head. But Jess was quieter than usual, and I could tell she was shaken too. We spent the day hiking around the lake, trying to shake off the weirdness of the night before, but everywhere we went, I felt like we were being watched. The forest seemed darker, the air colder. At one point, we found a patch of ice near the shore, cracked and broken, with a single white flower frozen beneath the surface. Jess stared at it for a long time, her face pale. That night, the wind picked up, howling through the trees. The mist on the lake grew thicker, swirling in strange patterns. We huddled around the fire, trying to ignore the feeling of dread that had settled over us. As midnight approached, the sobbing started again. Soft at first, then louder, echoing across the water. This time, all four of us heard it. Tyler grabbed a flashlight and insisted we check it out, convinced it was just some prankster messing with us. We followed the sound to the edge of the lake. The mist was so thick we could barely see a few feet ahead. Suddenly, Jess gasped and pointed. There, standing on the ice, was the woman in white. She turned to face us, her eyes empty and black, her mouth open in a silent scream. The ice beneath her feet began to crack, spider webbing out in all directions. She reached out a hand, beckoning us forward. I felt an overwhelming urge to step onto the ice, to follow her, to let her pull me under. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into those empty black eyes. It felt like time had stopped. The only thing I could hear was the wind and that terrible, heartbroken sobbing. The woman's hand was still outstretched, her fingers impossibly long and blue with cold. I felt myself taking a step forward, my boots crunching on the frosty ground. I didn't want to go, but it was like something inside me was being pulled, like a string tied around my heart, dragging me toward her. Jess grabbed my arm, snapping me out of the trance. "Don't," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Don't go out there." Tyler, always the skeptic, shined his flashlight directly at the woman. The beam cut through the mist, but instead of illuminating her, it seemed to pass right through, making her look even more ghostly. Sam muttered a prayer under his breath, his face pale as the moon. The woman's mouth opened wider, and the sobbing turned into a wail, a sound so full of pain and longing that it made my skin crawl. The ice beneath her feet cracked again, louder this time, and she began to sink, her dress billowing out around her like a cloud. As she disappeared beneath the surface, the wailing stopped, replaced by a suffocating silence. We all stood there frozen until Tyler finally broke the spell. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice shaking. "Now!" We stumbled back to our campsite, packed up our things in record time, and piled into the truck. As we drove away, I looked back at the lake. The mist had cleared, and the water was perfectly still, as if nothing had happened. But I knew what I'd seen. We all did. None of us spoke on the drive home. When we finally reached Anchorage, we went our separate ways, each of us haunted by what we'd witnessed. I tried to convince myself it was just a nightmare, a trick of the light and the cold. But the images wouldn't leave me. The woman's hollow eyes, her outstretched hand, the way the ice cracked beneath her feet. A few days later, Jess called me in tears. She said she'd been having nightmares, dreams of drowning, of icy hands pulling her under. She'd wake up gasping for air, her skin cold and damp with sweat. Tyler and Sam admitted they were having the same dreams. It was like the frozen bride had followed us home, her sorrow clinging to us like a shroud. Desperate for answers, I started digging into the history of Eklutna Lake. I found old newspaper clippings about a woman who'd vanished on her wedding night in the 1950s. Her name was Anna Petrovich. She and her new husband had gone out onto the frozen lake for wedding photos. The ice gave way, and she disappeared beneath the surface. Her body was never recovered. Some said her husband was never the same. He spent years searching the lake, convinced she was still out there, waiting for him. The more I learned, the worse the dreams became. I started seeing things out of the corner of my eye. A flash of white in the mirror, a shadow moving across the wall. Sometimes late at night, I'd hear sobbing outside my window, even though I lived miles from the lake. One night, I woke to find my bedroom freezing cold. My breath hung in the air, and frost crept across the window pane. I heard footsteps in the hallway, slow and dragging. The door creaked open, and there she was, the frozen bride. Her dress dripped. She didn't speak, but I felt her sorrow, her longing, her rage. She reached out a hand, and I felt that same pull, that urge to follow her into the darkness. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. She drifted closer, her face inches from mine, and whispered a single word: "Remember." Then she was gone. The room warmed, the frost melted, and I was alone. After that night, the dreams stopped, the sobbing faded, but I never went back to Eklutna Lake. None of us did. Sometimes when the wind is just right, I think I can still hear her crying out for someone to remember her, to mourn her, to set her free. If you ever find yourself at Eklutna Lake and you see a woman in white standing on the ice, don't follow her. Don't listen to her cries. Some love stories are never meant to end, and some spirits are never meant to rest. If you've ever spent a winter in Nome, Alaska, you know the darkness there is different. It's not just the sunless days or the endless howling wind. It's the way the night seems to press in on you, thick and heavy, like something alive. I learned that the hard way, during the longest winter of my life, the winter I met the night watcher. I moved to Nome in 2016 for a job at the hospital. I was a nurse, fresh out of school, eager for adventure, and a little desperate for a paycheck. Nome was remote, but I figured I could handle it. I'd grown up in Fairbanks after all. But nothing prepared me for the isolation, the cold, or the stories the locals told when the sun dipped below the horizon and didn't come back for weeks. I rented a tiny apartment on the edge of town, just a few blocks from the Bering Sea. The building was old, creaky, and always cold, no matter how high I cranked the heat. My neighbors were mostly other hospital staff, quiet, tired people who kept to themselves. The only person who ever really talked to me was Mrs. Kunik, an elderly Inupiaq woman who lived across the hall. She'd lived in Nome her whole life, and she liked to warn me about the things that came out at night. "Don't look out your window after midnight," she'd say, her voice low and serious. "If you see him, don't let him see you." I always laughed it off, thinking it was just another ghost story. But as the days grew shorter and the night stretched on, I started to feel uneasy. There was something about the darkness in Nome, something that felt hungry. It started with the footsteps. I'd hear them late at night, slow and deliberate, crunching through the snow outside my window. At first I thought it was just someone walking home from the bar, but the footsteps never seemed to fade away. They'd stop right outside my window and linger there, sometimes for hours. I'd lie in bed, heart pounding, listening to the sound of someone or something breathing just on the other side of the glass. One night, curiosity got the better of me. I crept to the window, careful not to make a sound, and peeked through the blinds. At first, I saw nothing but darkness. Then slowly, a shape began to emerge, a tall, thin figure standing perfectly still in the snow. He wore a long, tattered coat, and his face was hidden in shadow, but I could see his eyes, two pinpricks of pale blue light glowing in the darkness. I ducked away from the window, my heart racing. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, maybe a reflection from a passing car, but the footsteps came back the next night and the night after that, always stopping outside my window, always watching. I started having nightmares, dreams of being chased through endless snow, of icy hands grabbing at my ankles, of those glowing blue eyes staring into my soul. I'd wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat, convinced that the night watcher was standing right beside my bed. I tried to talk to my coworkers about it, but they just shrugged it off. "Everyone sees things in the dark up here," one of the doctors said. "It's just the winter playing tricks on your mind." But Mrs. Kunik took me seriously. She pressed a small pouch of dried herbs into my hand and told me to hang it above my door. "He's looking for someone." I did as she said, but the footsteps kept coming. One night, I woke to the sound of tapping on the window, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. I pulled the covers over my head and tried to block it out, but the tapping grew frantic, almost angry. The next morning, I found strange marks in the snow outside my window, long, thin tracks, like someone had been dragging their fingers through the drifts. I tried to convince myself it was just an animal, maybe a fox or a stray dog, but deep down, I knew better. The hospital was no escape. Patients started coming in with stories of their own, people seeing a tall, thin man watching them from the edge of the woods, or waking up to find their windows covered in frost, with strange symbols etched into the glass. One woman, delirious with fever, grabbed my arm and whispered, "He's coming for you. He knows your name." I started to dread the nights. I'd stay up as late as I could, watching the clock, listening for footsteps. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't keep the darkness out. It crept in around the edges, filling the apartment with a cold, suffocating fear. Then one night, everything changed. I woke to the sound of my front door creaking open. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming down the hallway. I reached for my phone, but the screen was dead, the battery drained. The footsteps stopped outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, listening. The doorknob turned slowly, and the door swung open with a groan. Standing in the doorway was the night watcher, tall, impossibly thin, his coat hanging off him like a shroud. His eyes glowed with that eerie blue light, and his mouth twisted into a smile that was all teeth and darkness. He stepped into the room, and the temperature dropped so fast I could see my breath. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. He reached out a hand, long and bony, and pointed at me. "Come with me," he whispered, his voice like the wind over frozen graves. I couldn't move. It was like my body had turned to ice, every muscle locked in place. The night watcher's hand hovered inches from my face, his fingers impossibly long and tipped with black, cracked nails. His breath was cold and smelled like old earth and rotting leaves. I could hear the wind howling outside, but inside my room, everything was silent except for the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. "Come with me," he whispered again, his voice echoing in my head, filling every corner of my mind. I felt myself slipping, like I was being pulled out of my own body, drawn toward those glowing blue eyes. I wanted to scream, to fight, but I was drowning in darkness. Suddenly, a sharp, acrid smell filled the room, smoke and herbs. The little pouch Mrs. Koenig had given me was burning, the string snapping and the dried leaves spilling onto the floor. The night watcher recoiled, his smile twisting into a snarl. He hissed, a sound like wind through broken glass, and shrank back into the shadows. I gasped, the spell broken, and scrambled out of bed. I grabbed the pouch and held it out in front of me like a shield. The night watcher hovered in the corner, his form flickering like a candle flame. For a moment I thought he would lunge at me, but then he melted into the darkness, vanishing through the wall as if he'd never been there at all. I collapsed on the floor, shaking and sobbing, clutching the burnt remains of the pouch. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. When the first gray light of morning crept through the window, I packed a bag and went straight to Mrs. Koenig's apartment. She opened the door before I could even knock, her eyes tired but kind. "He came, didn't he?" she said softly. I nodded, unable to speak. She made me tea and sat with me while I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, her face grave. When I finished, she reached out and took my hand. "He's old," she said. "Older than this town. Older than the people who first came here. He walks the night, looking for souls to take with him into the dark. He can't come in unless you invite him, but sometimes just looking at him is enough." I asked her what I should do. She told me to leave Nome, to go somewhere the darkness couldn't follow. "Some places are just hungry," she said, "and some people are more visible to things that walk in the night." I wanted to believe it was all just a nightmare, but I knew it wasn't. The hospital was full of stories, patients who vanished without a trace, people who went mad during the long winter nights, children who woke screaming about the man with blue eyes. I put in my notice that day. My boss didn't even ask why. She just nodded, her face pale, and told me to take care of myself. My last night in Nome, I stayed with Mrs. Koenig. She hung fresh herbs above the doors and windows, and we sat together in the dim light, listening to the wind. Just after midnight, I heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, crunching through the snow. They stopped right outside the door. The doorknob rattled, but the door held firm. I held my breath, clutching a new pouch of herbs. The footsteps lingered for a long time, then faded away into the night. I left Nome the next morning, driving south until the sun finally rose and the darkness loosened its grip. I never went back. Sometimes in the dead of winter, I still dream of those blue eyes watching me from the shadows. I wake up cold, my breath hanging in the air, and I wonder if the night watcher ever really let me go, or if he's just waiting for the darkness to find me again. If you ever find yourself in Nome and you hear footsteps outside your window after midnight, don't look. Don't let him see you. Some things in the dark are always watching, and some nights, they're looking for someone to take with them into the endless Alaskan night. That's it for tonight's journey into Alaska's darkest corners, from the haunted halls of Whittier to the icy grip of Eklutna Lake and the endless night in Nome. These stories remind us that some places hold on to their secrets and their spirits. Which encounter sent chills down your spine? Was it the whispering shadows, the frozen bride, or the night watcher's gaze? Let us know in the comments below. And if you have your own terrifying tale, share it. We might feature it in a future episode. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more true horror stories that will keep you up at night. Until next time, stay safe and beware the darkness.